Welcome to the Next Class 2.0 with host Rob Birdsell, Kent Hickey, and Aaron Barisano. Join us as we discuss the latest trends and innovations shaping education.
Hello and welcome to the Next Class. I'm Rob Birdsell, your host, and joined by my new co-host, Kent Hickey, which is great to have you, Kent, on for your first podcast of the season, fifth season of the Next Class. And welcome back, Dan Porterfield, for a second time in the Next Class. Dan, welcome.
Thank you, Rob. Thank you, Kent. Great to be here.
And Dan, you're joining a very select few two-time Next Class, Father John Foley, Jeb Bush, and Rick Hess. Now Dan is the fourth second-time guest, so thank you and great to have you back.
My pleasure, Rob. Thank you.
So for our guests who didn't hear your first time, Dan and I met almost 20 years ago, Dan, when you were on the board of the Cristo Rey Network, and I was hired as their CEO following almost an impossible job following Father Foley, but somehow managed to waddle my way through that. And you were at Georgetown, and Dan, at the time, and just doing some amazing work, which we'll get to the subject of your book, but you've had a passion for access to higher ed for many years. And I just remember your and Jack DeJoya's commitment to those Cristo Rey students. I was telling Kent that there are two things that stuck out for me. One, your ice cream cooler in your office, and your annual barbecue with every Cristo Rey student at your home. And I don't know if you want to comment on either of those, but two vivid memories of my time with you at Georgetown.
Well, I certainly had a tremendous experience getting to know you and supporting the Cristo Rey Network. And there was a stretch of time when I was at Georgetown when we had students from at least 10 Cristo Rey schools, had a summer program that we organized to give Cristo Rey Rising seniors a taste of college for 3 weeks before they went back for senior year. And a number of Cristo Rey students ended up taking some of my classes at Georgetown or working on projects I was associated with. And the bottom line is that those students added so much to the education of all students. It was good for them to be at Georgetown and good for Georgetown that they were there. And I'm sure those pipelines are still thriving. And certainly as the Cristo Rey Network has grown since the time when I served on your board, it's exciting to see how many more students now are having that Cristo Rey experience, which will inform not just college, but their entire lives.
Absolutely. And then from there, you went to Franklin and Marshall, which has a prominent place in your book that we're going to be talking about here. And you carried your ice cream cooler with you to F&M.
Well, technically, I bought a new one. My Georgetown ice cream freezer was a white freezer, and this next one was a sleek Maserati-like black freezer that in the president's office. And the students any student could come by, and we had a board by the freezer, which encouraging students to leave me a note if I wasn't there or if I was in a meeting. And so the highlight of my weeks was always reading back over those notes before wiping the board clean for the next week.
No, it was great. It was fun being there, and enjoyed our time together at F&M. But now, I can't believe it's been 6 years, but 6 years as CEO of the Aspen Institute. For our listeners that may not be familiar, can you share a little bit about what the Aspen Institute is?
Yes, thank you. So the Aspen Institute was formed in 1949 in the aftermath of World War, the Holocaust, the rise of the Soviet system, the beginnings of the communist takeover of China, the Cold War beginning, nuclear arms race beginning. And during that time, a group of business leaders, many from Chicago, and academics came together in what was then a sleepy silver town of Aspen, very underpopulated, that came together to discuss what they called the futures of humanism and how could the West to meet the challenges of leadership in the world and threats to the West by going deeper into an understanding of what is it that we humans share and how can humans rationally and productively collaborate in order to learn and grow and build a good society together. From that opening convening, which about 3,000 people attended, what was then called the Aspen Institute for Humanistic Studies was born. And our purpose is to ignite human potential, to build understanding and promote new possibilities for a better world. We realize that purpose, if you will, through major convenings, through structuring dialogue, both on and off the record, among leaders and people of all backgrounds, by doing leadership development work with young people, with grassroots communities, and with institutional leaders, and by working together to pull organizations and institutions and communities together for collective impact projects, which might be improving the quality of education at community colleges, or could be providing Native American youth around the country with leadership opportunities, or could be working on, say, with companies on carbon neutral plans for ports and shipping lanes or for school bus construction. Collective impact is, by definition, nonpartisan, practical, and a communal effort. And we found that dialogue, convening, and leadership development often lead to very practical collective impact projects. We always try to involve business leaders in our work because, consistent with our founding, the Institute has always believed that by pulling leaders of commerce and business into the conversation about education or about climate issues or about technology or about building a more powerful economy that supports all people, we can help make our country even more unified and even more competitive in a global sense and even more constructive and communal in a domestic sense. So that's what we've been doing for 75 years, and education is a big part of our work, along with, again, other key areas like public health, economic equality, and dealing with changes in cyber culture, among other things.
And our listeners, our viewers on YouTube can see your office. You're looking out at some aspen trees, which is pretty remarkable. And the institute, in Aspen, I was fortunate enough to have done a fellowship there, is one of the most beautiful places, Dan, I've ever been to on Earth. And it's just a very special place. And the work you all do is pretty profound. Kent and I are trying to model some of the work we do at Eiley after the seminars that you've been doing for 70 years. And you recently just received a rather game-changing grant. Could you talk about the grant you just received and what you hope to achieve with that grant?
Yeah, thank you, Rob. So overall, the Institute has about 600 employees. Our headquarters is Washington, D.C., and our sort of spiritual headquarters is our Aspen campus in Colorado, which was designed by an artist whose name is Herbert Bayer. He was a master in the Bauhaus School, which was disbanded by the Nazis. He was a refugee to America, and sponsored by Walter Pepke, our founder, he built this campus here, designed it. Every walkway, every earthwork, every building, every location of plants, all of it was designed by Herbert to try to create the affective experience that would allow people to experience wonder before nature and humility in sort of earthly creation, and then to be able to have a breakthrough aha moment or a moment of awe in seeing the mountains staring down on all sides, with the extraordinary clarity of the air here, and the ability to maybe see things as a result with a little more insight. They view dialogue as essential to this happening. So all of the rooms and buildings that Bayer created are circular. There's not a sage on the stage, but rather it's a place where every voice around the table has an equal resonance. And that tradition has allowed us to grow numerous programs over the years. As I mentioned, we probably have 60 now, including 13 global Aspens around the world. The first was Aspen Germany, the second Aspen Japan. We have one in India and Mexico, multiple European countries. The most profound one, I think, is our Aspen in Ukraine, where 10 colleagues are holding seminars on the good society and on ethical responsibility for one another and for mayors and for other civic leaders in bomb shelters and in subway stations. And so that idea that people of goodwill can come together for a curated conversation that, again, builds understanding and promotes something new, we began to apply to younger people about 20 years ago. And our inspirations were Mike and Jackie Bezos, who were the parents of Jeff Bezos and who were the first investors in Amazon some 25 years ago. And from that investment, they have been able to become major philanthropists. They created the Bezos Family Foundation, which Jackie is the president of and Mike is vice president. And they have supported a number of different institutions around the country on issues affecting children, youth, and families in particular. Not only that, but especially that. And they've also they've supported work, for example, that has allowed prisoners and their children to be able to connect with one another in a neutral, non-judgmental space like a children's museum. They've created programs that allow young people to work on disaster relief and contribute to their community and give back. They've created research enabled technologies that have allowed parents to track their children's progress in different key areas. And at the Institute, they've created several leadership programs, one of which, called the Aspen Challenge, allows us to go to 2 cities per year and support a challenge competition for 20 teams from public schools that are all challenged to design a solution to a problem of particular importance to the students. The faculty from those schools take part as facilitators. The challenge involves, a little bit of a curriculum on change making. Each year, we select several winners. Those winners then have the chance to present their change ideas in other settings, including the Aspen Ideas Festival. Mike and Jackie also supported our work on what's called the Stevens Initiative, which is a global effort to promote cultural exchange virtually for students in North Africa, the Middle East, and Mexico, with U.S. college students in about 49 of 50 states. So they've been involved with us for years. Mike's a board member. They've helped the Institute orient ourselves towards younger people. After we developed a strategic plan about a year and a half ago, it was our management team in partnership with our board, led by a Chicago philanthropist named Margot Pritzker. Mike Bezos, who was not on the planning committee, was just very inspired to see that our 3 priorities were trust, leadership, and then third, engaging, including, and inspiring the young. And Mike had been supporting programs here over the years. And he said, well, what can I do to really jumpstart this third priority so that the Aspen Institute establishes itself in perpetuity to be a youth-serving, young adult-serving organization, using all of the techniques that we've used with adults: dialogue, convening, leadership development, collective impact, but making it age-appropriate and focusing it on younger people, especially those who have been more removed from opportunity. And so Mike and Jackie collectively and the Bezos Foundation made an investment of $185 million in a new Center for Rising Generations, which will exist in the Institute in perpetuity. 10 million of those dollars will be current use dollars that will fund our startup phase, which is led by the distinguished educator Kaya Henderson, who we recruited to found the center. And then
Kaya was the moderator of one of my seminars.
Yeah, she's an Aspen fellow and tremendous former superintendent of Washington, D.C. schools, a tremendous leader.
She's
awesome. We will then have in 3 years the proceeds of $175 million, which may grow, will become part of the annual operating budget, basically 4% of $175 million plus each year. And so we will endow a center, and the center's vision is a pretty clear one. We hoped, working with others, that we can make civil dialogue, civic engagement, and leadership development a predictable part of growing up in America for all young people. And we're going to work with everybody that wants to work with us, whether it's school leaders of schools of all types, employers, civic and service organizations, obviously religious organizations, and then in particular, we're going to try to have an influence, we hope, at the level of culture. If TikTok is sold and a new owner assumes TikTok with a commitment to social responsibility and to detoxifying and de-addictifying, if that's a word, that platform, we want to be a part of helping create a youth-friendly TikTok, pro-social, positive, and a place where parents can have confidence their children can spend time with entertainment that is not harmful and perhaps even learning.
But Dan, that sounds remarkable, and congrats on the partnership with the Bezos family. Sounds like they are truly committed to young people and the work you do there.
Well, one of the things about Mike and Jackie is public and well known is that each of them, as teenagers, faced very serious challenges, and they were able to face those. Mike was a Peter Pan child, so he came from Cuba to America at the age of about 15 by himself. Jackie was a single mom who had sort of advocated for her right to stay in high school in Oklahoma, I think it was. And they met when they were both working as bank tellers in New Mexico. Mike was in college then, fell in love and married. And I think that one of the lessons from the Mike and Jackie story is that when young people are supported in making the right decisions, even as they're going through very difficult challenges, making strong, values-oriented decisions, having some confidence that if you do the right thing, you'll ultimately have more stability and more strength in your life, will pay off. Well, their story is that to the nth degree. That the child of that single mom that Mike married was Jeff Bezos, and they raised Jeff, and then the two children they had together, the three of them, they raised them as a close-knit and tight family. And it's almost an accident of history that when they were in middle age, their oldest son created a business that would grow to the size of Amazon.
Yeah, out of his garage, right? I'm up near Seattle, a little south of Seattle, Olympia. But yeah, I think it was a garage in Bellevue is where he started, and unbelievable vision.
Mike was educated by Jesuits, and I have on occasion made the comment, not in his presence, that being around him must be somewhat like what it was like to be around Ignatius Loyola, because of his incredible wisdom, humanity, respect for all, judgment, and he's a magnet for people who are looking for a person of great integrity and substance in their lives.
Yeah,
that's amazing.
Shared qualities there. The work that Rob and I and others are doing at ILE, gosh, it is, Rob, right? So connected to that spirit of Aspen with dialogue and such, because our focus is on school leadership, but it's not doctrinal, right? And it's also not nuts and bolts, because if there is an interior movement, interior formation, then you can be good at X's and O's, but it doesn't really matter, if you don't have that within. And so our, with Aspen, the humanistic tradition, ours is a spiritual humanistic tradition, but, very much, I think, in line with that. And we're around tables and we do text-based discussion around, Flannery O'Connor or whatever it might be, Dorothy Day and such. But I think there's some similarities there, which is fantastic.
When Walter Pepke founded the Institute, the first thing that they did was they created what's called the Executive Seminar, or the Aspen Seminar. And the idea of the seminar, Pepke said, he wanted business leaders in it, was not to make a CFO a better CFO, or to make the head of marketing a better head of marketing. It was to make them all more self-aware and more self-correcting. And
Absolutely.
This idea of text-based dialogue that's oriented towards values and helps people clarify their own thinking while also enhancing their ability to respond in an open-minded way to somebody else's thinking is a crucial part of, ultimately, I believe, of creating leadership group that has the ability to stay committed for the long term, because those values that you emphasize in Catholic school leaders are exactly the ones, like the water in the well, that needs to nourish them through the year after year of critically important and often very demanding work.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And we're going to take a quick pause here, and we'll be back. We're going to shift when we come back to Dan's new book, Mindset Matters.
Catholic Virtual is a proud sponsor of the Next Class 2.0 and dedicated to supporting Catholic school leaders. Our partner schools turn to us for online teaching solutions that fill teacher openings, expand their catalogs to offer more course choice, and provide options for students an alternative learning experience. Learn more about how we can support you at catholicvirtual.com.
Alrighty, welcome back. Thank you again for joining us at the next class. And with us, Dan Porterfield. I'm going to hold up your book for our listeners, Mindset Matters. Kent's also got it there, The Power of College to Activate Lifelong Growth. And Kent, do you want to lead us out here?
Yeah, I will. It's such a wonderful book. I do want to mention to you, Dan, I love that story about you having the freezer in your office for students to come in and get ice cream. I should mention, when I was a president of school, I also had a freezer in my office full of ice cream, but I never really thought of sharing it. So I wish I'd met you earlier and learned from your wisdom. But anyway, it's a terrific book. And I suppose the question I want to start off with is, what was the process that you engaged in that led you to think, yeah, I want to write a book on this? And then, and I guess a second part is, all schools talk about we educate the whole child or whole being in colleges and stuff. And, probably to varying degrees of success. But I was really struck by, as you broke down the growth areas, into discovery, into creativity, into mentorship. You really were kind of focused on formation of the whole person. In other words, it seems like maybe you could explain those categories isn't the right word,
Yeah.
but these growth areas, but also they're interrelated, are they not? I mean, they fold into each other.
Yeah. So, well, I wanted to write a book about the experience of seeing students grow for a long time, and I always had that in my head. And as I was mentoring students as the president of Franklin and Marshall, again and again, I saw these powerful experiences that they were having of learning and growth, often in moments of real challenge. And I thought I would find a way when I was president to aggregate these stories into a theory of residential education. But the demands of being the president were so constant that my writing was a bit scattered and I would get to it on and off. So then I transitioned to the Aspen Institute in 2018, and I kept in touch with all sorts of students who had been at Franklin and Marshall, as well as students at Georgetown. But I decided to focus on the place I'd been most recently. And during COVID, I made the effort to call 30 or 40 students and talk out with them, now that they were 2 or 3 years past graduation, what was enduring. And again, what they focused on were moments of sort of insight about the growth of their capabilities, and that those moments, the learning journey, was more important than the learning outcome, if you will. Like, they weren't talking about their starting salaries or even fellowships that they'd won, or sort of victories or triumphs. They were talking about the inherently meaningful journey to become even more alive to their potential and even more fulfilled in how they would use their talent. So that led me to think just a bit more about, well, what if I could sort of find a patterns in these narratives? What would the patterns look like? And I ended up focusing on 5 dimensions of the growth mindset being cultivated through college experience. And those are discovery, creating, mentorship, being a teammate, and striving, which I consider aspiration powered by deeply held personal values. And so I organized the book around those particular forms of growth. There's other forms that could have been thought through. I considered for a moment thinking about the journey for example, of spiritual understanding, or the journey of connecting in a more profound way with one's culture of origins, as also elements of kinds of growth mindsets. I decided to focus on the 5 I did because I thought I could make that case a bit more universally across many types of institutions, that the residential experience at its best is fostering those 5 forms of growth which the economy very much needs, and which higher education does disproportionately well compared to other institutions. I don't think the mindset for discovery, for example, is as easily fostered in 18 to 23-year-olds in first jobs, because they're not oriented towards the growth of the person in the first job usually. But a college is all about that. So I tried to single out mindset growth that was happening most emphatically in the college setting. One reason I was doing that was because there's been a constant drumbeat of cynical criticism of colleges. The critics should be contended with, and their perspective should be thought about and engaged. But the bottom line is that almost every critic makes a sort of a totalized attack on college. Maybe that college has become too left-wing and too woke. It's a brainwashing machine. Or it may be, oh no, it's the opposite. College has become no longer an escalator of upward mobility, but rather a way of reinforcing existing class distinctions. Oh no, it's not that. College is where they pay for the party. They're just getting blasted all the time. They're not actually challenging themselves. Or college is so expensive that students actually can't afford to take the time to learn, or it's too pre-professional. Well, all these criticisms can be dealt with, but there's still a fundamental core fact, which is that across thousands of institutions, millions of students are tapping the greatness inside of them through their interaction with faculty and one another in a meaning-rich college environment. And I wanted to explicate that because nobody is really doing that right now.
Yeah, and as you do that, you're responding to those criticisms in the book without explicitly, you're not being reactionary, you're not being defensive. Rather, you're putting forth a very positive message that does respond to those criticisms and the value, right, Rob, that we talked about with the kind of shift that Dan is bringing to this way of thinking about it. Right, Rob?
Right. I mean, Dan, my biggest takeaway was there is so much criticism, as you're saying, about higher ed. You just did a great summary of them. But the number one response is it's all about value, and you're going to earn more money and get a better paying job, and that's why you got to go to college. What I took from your book, which was, as you're alluding to, like I haven't heard someone say this, it's completely the opposite. You don't ever talk about money and value and jobs. It's all about the mindset and the lifelong learning that you carry with you. And for that, I'm grateful that you've got this discussion going, because that, to me, is what education's about. It's not about money. It's about unleashing the potential of every soul, every person.
Yeah. And there's, of course, this is a deeply held conviction across so many in education. That, as the saying goes, it's not the filling of the pail, but the lighting of a fire. It's so deeply a part of the Catholic intellectual and pedagogical tradition that you're trying to equip people to live lives of meaning and virtue and to be empowered to create their own future through education. And in this economy, where technology is disrupting almost every job constantly, where people are going to have to relearn and relearn again in their fields and in their careers, they're going to have to shift jobs. They're going to have to be comfortable being uncomfortable and have the agility to move into new ways of working. These mindsets are real assets, again, to discover, to sort through, separate the wheat from the chaff with information, bad and good, flowing at us in torrents, and be able to discover for yourself what is accurate and factual, or what is the answer to a question no one's looked for, or differently, to be able to create from your sort of spirit and fire and spine to make your invention, whether it's a business or a work of art or a novel idea, or to be able to work with people across the supposed divides of identity, to team up so that we become stronger than I, so that the collective work can build something that no individual alone could ever do. The mindsets for those kinds of ways of engaging as professionals are going to be huge assets for people. But the opposite,
Mm.
those who fear change, who fear challenge, who don't want to do things differently, who can't sort out for themselves what's accurate information, who can't work with others, who can't get mentored and can't grow from the learning that somebody gives them, those people are going to really struggle in the workplace and the society of the 21st century. College is ideally positioned to foster these growth mindsets and equip and empower people. But we do need to be intentional about it and not just hope it happens. And there's ways to do that, to focus on student learning such that we're investing in students' ability ultimately to believe that they are the leaders of their learning.
So for example, the striver in your context, it's not about the number of bodies you're climbing over to get to the top, right? Because if you're not collaborative, you can't strive in this culture. And that's why I think, that all of these come together,
Absolutely.
really into the holistic person we're looking at here, right? And the value is in that. And certainly we can't disregard the financial benefits that will come from this. But if the focus is on the financial benefits, kind of paradoxically, you won't get thereafter.
Yeah.
Focus on the person you are. Is that
Yeah,
what you're getting at? The whole being.
that certainly resonates. And the chapter which I talk about striving as a mindset, that's the mindset to climb the next hill, to look to the next open field, to imagine being something even different, although you haven't done it yet, and say, why not try? And so when I tell the story of strivers, uh, one's name is Jeanette Berlanga from San Antonio. Another's name is Carolina Giraldo from Miami. Another's name is Nadia Johnson from New Haven. Another's name is Allie Morey from Boston. Those four young women, in each case, they had to go deep into what is it I personally value when dealing with a very great difficulty.
Mhm.
For Carolina, it was the death of her father. For Jeanette, it was blocked grief from her father's death when she was little. For Allie, it was a feeling of yearning for more in college, even as she kept trying the next thing. And for Nadia, it was imposter syndrome. And each of those students, they found their way forward, helped by caring adults in the college setting, and they were able to create growth for themselves, especially in their junior and senior years in all these cases, where they came to say, I know I've grown. I know how to grow. I can do it again. And I like it. And
Yeah.
that's what
Yeah.
adds up to make a mindset.
And for again, I'll hold up the book here, but for our readers, future readers of Mindset Matters, and I think it's people in almost any leadership setting, but certainly we look at secondary, primary school, colleges, is that what Dan does is he interweaves the biographies of these young people within the messaging, and it really comes alive through your discussion of these young people. And I'll say another thing that really comes alive, and another question I have for you is, so much of their growth is predicated upon relationships,
Yeah.
and in particular relationships with that teacher, whoever that teacher is, right?
Yeah.
And so I'm thinking about Franklin and Marshall. I'm like, man, gosh, how many kids can we get to go? I mean, look at the relationships they're establishing with these professors who clearly value talking with and being with these kids and sharing these. Well, how do you get to the point of having a college where teachers are valuing their time in that manner with students? Because don't you also have to then say to them as the primary leader, some things might have to give way. Maybe you won't bring in as many grants. Maybe you're not going to publish as much, because if we're focusing on the teacher student relationship, that needs to be elevated, maybe even contractually. I don't know how you do this, but yeah, how do you get to that point, Dan, where,
So,
where that is happening?
well, I was quite fortunate because I had growing up very impactful teachers and coaches in Baltimore at Loyola High School, Blakefield, and that then
Hmm.
carried over when I went to Georgetown. I went to Georgetown as a student wanting to have relationships with professors and with Jesuits because I'd had them already. I knew their value. And so one of the goals I had in writing this book and showing how the mentor-mentee, teacher or coach relationship with student is so impactful. So I wanted people that were doing it to see it validated and see it celebrated. And I wanted people that valued it but hadn't seen it enough in their school to think, well, how can we foster this more? And I only wish I could have told 40 more stories because honestly, there were so many stories of Franklin and Marshall faculty helping students to create their education. And see, that's the key thing. The key thing to it all is that each of us has the power to create the education we seek. And we have to challenge, inspire, and support young people to be the active authors of their learning. They are responsible for their education. The rest of us have a big role to play in listening and supporting and being creative and thoughtful mentors and enablers of learning. But it starts with the individual. I've taught in prisons. I've taught students where the institution they were a part of was bent on their destruction, and yet their own individual motivation to learn carried the day, even in that setting. So part of my challenge is to challenge students to think of themselves as active learners. There's a lot you can do to be an active learner right away in college. You can go meet professors outside of class. You can go to some of the lectures that are everywhere on campus. You can go to some of the different clubs and get yourself involved right away. You can figure out how mentorship happens in the school and become a mentor quite quickly on a college setting. You can join more teams. It's on you. On the professor and mentor side of it, I think the key is, as you say, that it is very valuable for professors to be freed, if you can say that this way, from other responsibilities so they can spend more time with students. I lived in a residence hall with my family for 8 years at Georgetown while I was vice president. And those 8 years gave us more opportunity to have a positive impact than I can ever imagine because we were like the faculty family on campus with the kids and the dog looked at by thousands of students all the time, available and present. And just being present, actually, in a constructive way is important. I want to say one more thing about, two more things really about the professor's role. The first is that the professors are intellectual role models. And so they when they pursue questions honestly, when they challenge their own assumptions, when they go deep to try to get at the foundational assumptions behind other assumptions, when they foster classroom discussion where they challenge students to be precise in what they say and to be able to understand what others are saying and say it back to them accurately, that modeling is incredibly important in the development of growth mindsets because it shows younger people that older people who they're looking up to have adopted this personal commitment to be a constant open learner. That's incredibly powerful. The Jesuits were the embodiment of that for me in high school. The second thing that should be said at the same time is that often faculty ourselves adopt a fixed mindset, i.e., we look at our students and say, well, Dan's not that good at math, but Dan's a good writer. Let's encourage Dan to be a writer because he's not going to be distinctive in quantitative fields. That's not a good approach at all because when the faculty have fixed mindsets in the way they approach their students, the students then adopt those mindsets. And so I think it's very important for faculty to constantly be showing students the pathways they can take to learn, to break down learning into its core elements so that students can pick it up piece at a time, and never send the signal, you're not good at something. Never. Society will send that signal all the time. Somebody has to be the demigods or the angels inside students' brains saying, you can do it. Try a little harder. Get a little help. Nadia's story in my book is all about a student who was pounding her head against the wall in pre-med until she said, I have to learn from the people in my community back home at Newark who raised their hand and asked for help in church when they needed it. I've got to be like that. Let go of my pride. Go get help. And with a little bit of academic help, she flipped the whole story of her college education, became a star student, and now has been a star educator in the Baltimore City Charter School Network, KIPP. So faculty have a huge role. It's the greatest responsibility you can have as a faculty member is to imbue your students with a sense of possibility and hope that their talent and their industry together can allow them to create something new for themselves.
Dan, it's been...
when you hear this term that liberal arts or education is about freedom, that's what it means. You're giving people the freedom of their own ingenuity, their own gifts, their own talent. And, again, where did I first feel that? Absolutely at Loyola High School, where the people we respected, the Jesuits and lay teachers that were there, we respected them and they showed respect for us, talking to us like adults when we were worthy of that, occasionally talking to us like a guiding more parent figure when that's what was needed. And intellectual excellence and intellectual freedom was always prized as a component of a Catholic education, not as a side feature, but as a defining part of it. And that idea that you could fuse a faith tradition and an intellectual tradition with an eye towards making a difference for the world, those coming together like three cords in a big rope, pulling it together. Intellectual formation, spiritual, personal formation, and civic engagement and civic formation. That, I think, is what American higher education at its best still does and needs to do more of.
Dan, we could go on and on. We could have scheduled this for 3 hours, but I recognize our time is just about up here. But I do want to finish, as we finish every podcast, with a final question, and that is who, and you can't answer the same way you did a couple years ago. So who is your greatest teacher and why?
Well, I don't know what I said a couple years ago, so that's a pleasure.
Perfect.
But I would say that I will paraphrase Madeleine Albright, who was a member of my board of trustees and is an extraordinary human being, a double refugee, first from the Nazis, then from the Soviets, whose family restarted life in Colorado, and she went on to become Secretary of State and so much more, an award-winning professor at Georgetown. And Madeleine, I heard her say one time, the older I get, the younger my mentors are. And so I would say that my best learning, one way of saying my best learning, is that by constantly engaging with young people as a teacher and mentor, I find that my perspectives on the world and on what's important are constantly renewed, that both the enduring values that I have are reinforced and that new insights into what's needed today emerge from those relationships.
Well, that, as long as I've known you, you've always had that engagement with your students, with young people. But in interest, I love that comment, Madeleine Albright. The older I get, the younger my mentors become.
Rob, what that reminds me of is, one of the texts we discuss in ILE is the Rule of Benedict, which is 1,500 years old, right? He has this amazing rule in there that when they have meetings over an important issue, the voices of the young monks must be heard, which in that culture at that time, and probably in our culture today too, they're often pushed aside. Like, what do you know? But St. Benedict was wise enough to know, no, through that youth, you're going to see a different perspective, particularly as you get older, and you become, as you point out in your book, more of a fixed mindset, right, instead of an open mindset. So, boy, that resonates. We got to use that one, Rob.
There you go.
Outright. So,
and it circles around here nicely because we started talking about the investment of Mike and Jackie Bezos in creating a center on rising generations at the Aspen Institute. And what this endowed center will do, among other things, is ensure that youth voices and youth perspectives run across all of our Aspen programs.
Love it. Well, Dan, thank you for joining us once again on the next class. To our listeners, if you enjoyed this, like us, share this with family and friends, and we look forward to seeing you and hearing you on the next class.
Thank you
very much, Dan.
Thank you for tuning in.